Hi, this is lesson 5 of the Glacial Geomorphology unit I put together. If this is the first video you're watching, I recommend going back and watching the intro and all the other videos leading up to it. But prior to this lesson, we just completed our investigation on Earth materials. The in-between lesson that is kind of the implied task, or is up to the teacher based on the needs of their students, is a geologic history of Iowa, kind of the layering and what it looks like. So, implying that you've done that in this little space right here, like lesson 4.5, let's go ahead and jump into lesson 5. This is going to be a little bit of a unique lesson, especially for a science class, if people really haven't done too much debating. This is something you probably think about for an English or a rhetoric class. But what I have here is a kind of a bioethics debate. And I entitled it Farmers, Townspeople, and Conservationists because those are some of the standpoints I kind of thought of could be used. But in this lesson, students are really going to be looking into kind of the potential stance of one of these groups. So people that are heavily involved with agriculture. This could be farmers. This could be people that are working in agribusiness. People that are tied more specifically to agriculture. They can also look at it from the standpoint of townspeople, people who live in town, people who have businesses in town, and then people from a conservationist kind of viewpoint and setting. The whole idea behind it is we're going to be looking at the bioethical issue of pollution within the Iowa Great Lakes of contaminants. So that's one of the reasons why during the past lesson we added some contaminants, either the food coloring or the glitter, and started thinking about how could contaminants reach this water? What does that mean? We're really going to delve into what are some potential sources of pollution. This also ties back to one of our earlier lessons when we had the kind of the assessment questions, those formative assessment where how could contaminants break into the water cycle? What stage? What's the source? What are their down-reaching second and third order effects? We're really going to get into that in this lesson. This is one of the two lessons that I think makes this unit more of a high school unit as well because of kind of the independent research that's going to be required of a student or their group to do this. That I think pushes it above what a middle schooler might be capable of. So with that, this lesson, you're going to help students develop their critical thinking skills. They're going to be drafting up arguments, coming up with research or evidence based on their research, and then having an in-class debate and discussion with each other and seeing what that looks like and trying to see the complexity of these issues. Because I think a lot of times it's very simple to look at an environmental issue or a biological issue within science, and everyone in class goes, oh yeah, this is a bad thing, we should stop it. It's kind of hard to think about the other groups that might be at play in this and what their standpoints are. So this is to help try and provide some perspective, broaden that perspective for other students as well, and to really get them thinking. As far as NGSS, these last two lessons that we have in this unit really tie into the human impact on the environment, which is kind of that last section of the NGSS for Earth and Environmental Sciences. So that's what I kind of envisioned for this. As far as background info, students should be familiar with how contaminants can travel through the water cycle or some examples of contaminants. The Iowa Groundwater Basics has some information on that for you as the teacher. And so when you're doing kind of your history of Iowa, if you do include kind of a more modern, the farming practices in Iowa that can kind of tie into the geologic history of that, that would be a good time to talk about how different contaminants and stuff like that can reach into it. I'm not saying that farming is the only source, but it does go into a lot of those different practices, and I think that would be the area during that kind of 4.5 lesson, if you will, that you could insert that in and take a couple of days to talk about. Students really should be familiar with their water cycle at this point, and the glacial features. They should already have a pretty good understanding of what that is and how those work. And they've really, I would imagine at this point, should be piecing together how those two things interact, both the glacial terrain and the geologic setting and then the water cycle. They should really be starting to make those connections and starting to see this is a lesson where they're like, okay, what does that mean for us as society? So material students need, they're going to need internet access. It definitely at school, if not at home. If you can get ways for students to have it at home if they don't, that would really help them out a lot. These are some helpful resources that I've included. A lot of these come from the Iowa Department of Agriculture, Iowa State University ag department and some research that they've done there. And then I also have a poster board that was put together by my friend Michaela Just, that she did a research project on that talks about tiling and other farming practices and how that interacts with the environment. So I'll include that in the big bundle of information that comes with this unit plan as well. She's been gracious enough to let me use that. And then these are she has some other sites and sources on that poster that students can use as a resource as well when they start conducting their research. Delving into it, as far as the introduction, the scenario I've kind of set up and I imagine is that there's growing concern about contaminants and their buildup in the Iowa Great Lakes region. This doesn't necessarily have to be about the Iowa Great Lakes region, is because contaminant buildup in bodies of water is something that is a concern throughout the U.S. and throughout the world, honestly. But to make it local and to continue with kind of the theme we've been going with in the case study, I focused it on the Iowa Great Lakes region. If you have a different area that's near you or a larger body of water that you could use as a case study, by all means, please use that and make it more local and give in that community tie. Student questions, they're really probably, this is what's going to be driving it, is their own questions, because depending on what the three viewpoints I have being like agribusiness and farming, local townspeople for whatever nearby towns, and then conservationists, depending on which one of those three that they choose, or if you come up with others, or if they come up with others, they need to start developing questions as to, okay, what would my viewpoint be if I belonged to this group? Or if they even do belong to that group, what would their viewpoint be in investigating those questions? What are some questions that other groups are going to have? So this is very student-driven as far as questioning goes. And then the ways to investigate, that's really up to them, how they want to gather their information. Obviously, you want them coming up with information from credible sources, so you could talk about that as a little bit, just kind of going into how you can conduct research in that sense and how you can make these arguments and cases. That would be a good point for the teacher to come in and be like, hey, these are different types of sources we have. How do we establish credibility? How do we effectively cite these sources? Obviously, this isn't a research paper. This is just them gathering information. If you want them to do a research paper, you can. That wasn't necessarily my thought process with it, but including ethical ways to investigate and do research would be a good idea. As far as the investigation itself, like I said, it's very student-driven, but divide your students up into groups based on their interest. So if someone is really interested in farming practices and how pollution impacts agribusiness, let them go for it, by all means. Or based on availability of, if there's not a ton of students that want to do one, you might have to assign groups. That's kind of up to you as the teacher and on the individual basis. I said try and keep the groups fair. You don't really want to stack one too heavy against other students. If one's looking a little big, ask if some students would be willing to switch into a different group. The one that I think could probably be a little lacking that students might not be interested in is like the townspeople. With that, I kind of imagine people that live in an urban area near the lake or have businesses that are related to that body of water. Especially in Lake Okoboji, there's a lot of tourism that happens up there. How would pollution affect the tourism and those businesses that depend on that tourism in order to make their money? How does it affect the economy? So that's kind of what I envision for that, but I can see how students might not be as interested in it. So just distribute the groups. If you come up with more, by all means, please use them. Tell me about them, see how they work. I'm all ears. Students are going to research their stance on the pollution issue with the region and with the lakes or contaminants. I use pollution is interchangeably with contaminants in this. I apologize if that offends anybody. Then have the groups, once they've done the research, debate solutions to the policy, or debate solutions and policy. The big idea here isn't to point blame at anybody or any one group or be like, this is all your fault, we need to tax you guys or have you guys stop doing this, but to come together as a group, because the contaminants in the water and polluting the water affect everybody. Get them to help get them to realize that on their own, and then come up with a solution together that benefits everybody, or that everybody can make work. I just kind of have an example that like farmers might not want to look into alternative fertilizers due to cost and stuff like that. So really have students delve into, okay, how does this group contribute to the issue of, are they a source for pollutants and contaminants? What type, what aspect, how is it infiltrating the water cycle? Is there a certain reason why a certain area is at greater risk? What could they do differently? Why would they might not want to do things differently? Have them really just ask every question under the sun as far as this is concerned, because that's just going to lead to a better in-class debate. And then as far as the actual debate itself is concerned, my big thing is make sure that it's clear that no group is seeking to beat the others. You're all working together to come up with a solution to a common issue. And I think that's going to be an important factor to help ingrain in them is for a lot of bioethical issues, it's not we're trying to beat one side or the other. It's an issue for everyone. And the bottom line is that we need a solution, and we need to work together to reach that solution through compromise and finding the best one that benefits everybody. So if you can focus students on that, I think you're going to really have a successful debate. As far as negotiation is concerned, this whole process, the debate aspect is, in that discussion, is a negotiation. The full class should really be spent, or a full class at least should be spent on them negotiating what they find and their thoughts on what the solution should be. This, as far as how much class time this takes, I could see this being an entire week thing where you give students 4 class periods to do research, meet as a group, practice what their arguments are, and draft that together, and then a full day of in-class debate. Or you could have 3 days of preparation and research, 2 days of in-class debate. It's really up to how much time you have available to you, but I could definitely see this taking a full school week, 5 class periods, 45 minutes each. As far as what you might want to collect as a teacher, if you want them to draft up kind of a notes outline of their big hard-hitting cases and where they found it, what their personal thoughts are, that could be something you could use to kind of assess their learning on this as far as the process leading up to it. But as far as the debate goes, just see who's speaking, see what arguments they're making, stuff like that. Try and come up with some format to engage and grade students on participation if you want to have grading. Make sure that they know that going into it. I didn't include like a rubric or what I thought this should be graded on because as a teacher, you're going to have different things that you want to push into your grade book and whatnot. As far as the assessment goes, I think that the discussion itself is really going to be your ability to assess their learning based on their research. But this would be another opportunity for students to have like a written reflection that they could turn into you for a moment to read and gather their thoughts. The way I kind of envision is students should write a reflection on what they think, their individual thoughts, not just necessarily what their stance is that they're playing for this debate, but what do they actually think should be done for this issue? Because they might disagree with their group, they might have an idea that they didn't voice to the whole class. See what they think as an individual as well. Remaining questions and feedback, and then talk and have them write about what they think the societal relevance is. Why are we talking about this issue? Not if you're not from the Iowa Great Lakes, a student might be like, I don't care about this, but try and show how this is a larger scale issue that's not just localized to that area. And then, like with all the other lessons, and after action review, see what worked well, see what didn't. If students needed more time to research, if they needed more class time to debate, make sure that you're reflecting on that as an educator yourself so you can make this lesson the best it can be. So this is one of our last lessons. We'll get into, this ties in with our very last lesson in our summative assessment, so I'll get into that in our next video. Stay tuned for more.